let me end by mentioning three trends to keep an eye on. And I mention these because I've got arguments about the three of them, but I also have true questions about them, and think that these are. I had the pleasure in early September of being at a meeting where all the security planners in the U.S. government, from Pentagon, State, Treasury, and Homeland Security, and lots of others, came together, and I was one of three people who tried to tell them what they should be thinking about. So humbly, I have been thinking a little bit about, what should you be thinking for the 10-year, 15-year out years. I had many more points than I'm going to mention now, but these three are trends that I suggest that we keep an eye on. One is the return to multipolarity. David Frost, the British Director of Policy Planning, makes this a very important macro trend that he sees. I mentioned the 2025 report by the National Intelligence Council. That is to say, the return to multipolarity. What is that? The movement away from unipolarity to and a U.S.-centered world. How quickly is it happening? What are its consequences? It's very hard to get a handle on that. It's not easy to find historical cases, but you kind of have to feel like it's not necessarily going to be fun. Is this a master shift that's going on? What are its implications? I would simply suggest that there are three aspects to the return to multipolarity that are different and increasingly in sequence aspects of this. One is simply diffusion of power. That's, China has more GNP than it did before relative to the global share. The U.S. has less, the West has less, the OECD, so forth. Diffusion of power. The second step along the way would be the rise of new poles. It's not just that some states now have a greater share and have more capabilities, but they constitute a pole. And a pole, in this case, is a hub that organizes geopolitics of different kinds in a sphere and perhaps beyond a sphere. So a new pole means a center of attraction, that states are making choices between this pole and that pole. And then the third step along the way would be the return to balancing and security competition, which is when you start to worry. My point is that it's like a bus. The first stop is diffusion of power. The second stop is a new pole. The third stop is balance of power. You can get off, the world can get off at any of those stops. You've got to have diffusion and pole to get balancing, but you can have a pole without balancing, and you can have diffusion without a pole. So my own guess is that we aren't going to have a pole anytime soon, even China. But it's what we should be thinking about. Is it a source of attraction? China doesn't have any allies, and doesn't have any tradition of allies. And the Western states are just ally happy. Their kind of capacity to attract allies, to build allies, to turn NATO into a permanent organization, to bestow it with ideology and kind of a sense of identity. So poles, that's the first trend to keep an eye on. Second trend, the softening and deterioration of political order in key states. Sam Huntington, who recently passed away, became famous for his Clash of Civilizations book. But before he wrote that bad book, he wrote a really good book called Political Order in Changing Societies. And this was his issue of social mobilization, growth, movement of people, groups, associations, bubbling up from below, and to what extent are there political institutions in a country to shape and constrain and guard against revolution and excess. So political maturity of institutions matter to kind of mediate this hyper social movement and mobilization. That's the second trend that I'm asking you to think about is the Huntington question of whether at the macro level, the world level, there is sufficient maturity and strength of institutions, but also in key states. Is there a general trend? Brazil, Mexico, Turkey, Indonesia, is there these so-called swing states that were kind of identified as middle-tier states in the 1980s and 90s? I think Madeleine Albright kind of thought there was a kind of set of countries that were these critical swing states of this sort. Are they all doing okay, or is there, as a group, a kind of deterioration? Mexico and Venezuela, for example, who are the two most important exporters of oil to the United States, their export capacity is going down, and that matters. And it's going down. Their production is going down for different reasons, but people talk about state failure to invest because of corruption, weakness of the state, and mismanagement. So is there a kind of softening of these states, let alone the weak states like Afghanistan, that may not really be capable of being brought up? Finally, the integration of rising states. The post-war order that I've said such nice things about today was very much a Western, US-led system, Western-oriented. The great drama today, however, is rising states seeking role and status. China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Russia wants very much to be reconstituted as a great power. That's the great drama. In some ways, the way I've thought about this is that for 50 years, we had a kind of liberal order that, from an American perspective, looked like an American company, like America Incorporated. It was not the global system that FDR wanted, that is to say the UN and Bretton Woods. Because of the weakness of Europe and the rise of the Cold War, it became a North Atlantic system. UN Security Council became dysfunctional. NATO became the center of security provision. Bretton Woods didn't work as the founders hoped it would, and the dollar and the American market became the generator. What I see today is that there is a demand, a global demand, to take this company public, new shareholders, and a revised board of directors, and make it WorldCo. And that's what is this great drama we're witnessing. And my worry is, or my question is, what if the U.S. doesn't want to sell the family business? What if the new states don't want to join this business? And what if the business is in the wrong market space? What if the answer to all three of those is no, no, no? How do we reconstitute the governance system to deal with the problems of the 21st century when we have old-fashioned, out-of-date institutions with states, and let's say it, Europe clinging on to voting shares in institutions when you need to reapportion authority and voting shares to rising states? How do we adapt our institutions? Can we do it? So to conclude, I'll simply say that the world is not at sea without a compass, and there is a sturdy vessel, or to change the metaphor, a lot of the world is not on thin ice. There's heavy, dense ice underneath a lot of what we call world politics. We know how to cooperate. The problems we have today are more problems of success than problems of failure. Great powers really can forge a new concert. And the Western countries should take the lead in doing so. Thank you very much.